Hey all, Hiba here. Welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to let you in on a secret, because if you have a Nintendo Switch, I'm pretty sure at one point you would have been wishing that Baldur's Gate 3 would be available on the Switch. Now it isn't, and I don't think it ever will be, but don't despair, because Larian, who is the developer of Baldur's Gate 3, their previous game is actually available on Switch, and it is, in most opinions, even better than Baldur's Gate 3. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity Original Sin 2 are, in most respects, actually very, very similar. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 actually runs on the same engine that powers Divinity 2, called the Divinity engine. So that's why the games are pretty much carbon copies of each other. Now, Divinity is heavier on the combat, and the combat is more difficult, while Baldur's Gate 3 is more forgiving on the combat, while the story takes more of a front seat. So like any other good role-playing game, in Divinity 2 you have to create your own character. Now there are, pre-made characters like Fane here. He's kind of the Divinity equivalent of Astarion, and he's quite fun to play. But of course, if you don't want to go with a pre-made character, you can just create your own. But first up, I want to show you that Divinity actually has the full package on Switch. It comes with single player, it comes with online play, and you can play it both over the internet and also using the wireless ability of the Switch. Now, like I mentioned before, Divinity is quite a bit harder than Baldur's Gate 3. So even if you went through Baldur's Gate 3 on the most difficult, setting, it's going to be easy compared to Divinity 2, because the combat is far more difficult. So I suggest you start on Explorer mode or even Story mode. Like even Story mode is going to give you quite a challenge, at least for the first 2 chapters. So keep that in mind, right? Don't just jump in on the highest difficulty. So back to the character creation here, because again this is quite different from Baldur's Gate 3, where Baldur's Gate goes by the rule set, an official rule set. Divinity is built on Larian's own rule set, which is, honestly better for a game, because this rule set was made with the game in mind. It's not like a tabletop rule set kind of, stuffed into a game. Not that it doesn't work in Baldur's Gate 3, it just works far better in Divinity. And also Divinity takes some liberties, like it introduces a lot of surfaces and stuff like that, and interesting magic, and lots of quirky abilities that you just can't do inside the Dungeons and Dragons universe. So as you'll see, Divinity is a little bit more traditional. For example, when it comes to attributes, like you spread out points just like you would in, for example, the older Diablo games. And I think that's more interesting, I think that's more fun, and I think it's a play style that appeals to more players, to be honest, actually. So the character creator in Divinity is almost as crazy as the one in Baldur's Gate 3. Now you won't see anyone's private parts, of course, but other than that, you can pretty much tailor every aspect of your character. And you can even choose between living and undead characters. Now the difference is that undead characters will use poison to heal, while the living characters will use healing potions and the more traditional stuff. Skills is also a huge part of Divinity, and there's many different schools of magic in the game, and abilities and all sorts of stuff, and they all come with different skills that you can of course upgrade, and sometimes you can even mix and match these skills using other skills. So the gameplay is extremely deep, and I would actually say that it is a deeper experience than Baldur's Gate 3, which is of course quite an achievement. Now, Divinity 2 also has similar talents to Baldur's Gate 3, except for the one I have on screen here, Lone Wolf, which isn't for some reason in Baldur's Gate 3, because I guess it doesn't match with the rule set. But again, because Divinity 2 can take some liberties, you can use the Lone Wolf skill set if you want to play with a party of just 2 players. It basically makes one player more powerful and limits your party to 2 players. So that works really well if you want to play co-op. So like I mentioned earlier, the game itself runs on the same engine as Baldur's Gate 3, and the games look pretty much identical. Of course, that is a good thing. So lots of colorful environments, nice animations, and of course lots of stuff to explore. Now, although there is an excellent story in Divinity 2, it is told primarily using text when you are interacting with NPCs or other players. And of course, that's a far cry from the way Baldur's Gate 3 simply has everything down as a cutscene. But on the other hand, it also makes this game a little bit more suitable for players who want to play multiplayer or just want to, have fun. Because, as I said, the focus is more on battles and experimentation. Just like Baldur's Gate 3, you get the best experience once you mix the combat with some magic, some spells, and some, experimentation. Because this is just as open-ended a game as Baldur's Gate 3, meaning that you can experiment as much as you want. You can teleport enemies, you can drop stuff on them, you can come up with all sorts of strategies to win a fight, and the game will let you. Again, just like Baldur's Gate 3, it is important to examine your enemies to figure out what their weak sides are, and then attack them in, that way. And like I alluded to earlier, surfaces, like you can see here, there's for example the blood surface and the fire surface. They play an enormous role in Divinity 2, and it's one of the most entertaining parts of the gameplay. And in Baldur's Gate 3, that isn't really the case, and it's all to do with the Dungeons and Dragons rule set. There's not much about surfaces in that, and that's a shame, because the surface gameplay really lifts the combat and the general gameplay in Divinity 2 to a much higher level than it is in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, if you think the combat in Baldur's Gate 3 is good, you should play the combat in Divinity 2, because it is even better, because there's so many more layers that you can exploit here by actually using surfaces in the way they are implemented in this game. I know they are to a certain extent in Baldur's Gate 3, but they're nothing like the same. Of course, there's some auxiliary magic as well, just like Baldur's Gate 3, like chicken form and stuff like that. So you're gonna get everything that you already have in Baldur's Gate. So trading and also crafting is a huge part of Divinity as well. And again, this is an area where Baldur's Gate 3 kind of lacks, because the crafting in Baldur's Gate 3 is pretty much non-existent. I know you can craft some things, but it is nowhere as extensive and as entertaining as it is in Divinity. And of course, being a role-play game, Divinity has a huge inventory, or you will have at some point, where you keep all the stuff you find in the game, and you can craft using pretty much all of it. So people, that brings us to the end of this video here, and all I really wanted to get out here using this kind of method here is to show you that even though you may have played Baldur's Gate 3 on a different platform and you're itching to play it on your Switch, or you haven't even played Baldur's Gate 3 yet, which is, like, it's terrible. You have to play it. It's the best game ever. But if you insist on playing on your Switch, then Divinity Original Sin 2 is a very, very similar game made by the same developer and using the same engine and, pretty much the same setup. And in some cases, I actually think Divinity 2 is better than Baldur's Gate 3, especially when it comes to combat and crafting and, pretty much exploration as well. So definitely a must-have game for your Switch if you're just the slightest interest in role-playing games. So I hope this, helped you a little bit out there. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or you want me to look into something else in the game, or other games for that matter. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Lots of content coming, and I will see you out there.